Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. My name is Charlie. When I found out my wife was pregnant with her boss's baby, but expected me to raise the baby, I knew I had to do something she never expected. Looking back now, I realized the signs were there long before my wife, Sabrina, got pregnant. But when you're living inside a marriage, busy with work, bills, and the daily grind of being an adult, it's easy to miss the subtle shifts that signal something fundamental is breaking down. Sabrina and I had been married for 6 years before everything came to a head. We met through mutual friends when I was working as a consultant at a mid-level firm, and she had just landed her first real job at First National Bank as a junior loan officer. We both had ambitions, and we both wanted to build careers and create a stable life together. The first few years of marriage were good. We bought a house in the suburbs after our second anniversary, a modest 3-bedroom apartment that felt like a mansion compared to where we started from. We had dinner together most nights, took trips, and talked about everything from work drama to our plans for the future. Our physical intimacy felt unbreakable as we satisfied each other in the other room. However, around year 4 of marriage, things changed. It was gradual at first. I assumed it was the type that married couples often experience as the initial excitement settles into routine. We were now both working hard, coming home exhausted, spending evenings on our laptops or collapsed in front of the TV. Date nights have become less frequent than they used to. Our conversations became more about who was picking up groceries, paying the minor bills, and other things. Our physical intimacy did decline, too. What had been 3 or 4 times a week dropped to maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks. Sabrina always seemed more tired and stressed than I. I tried not to take it personally because I assumed this was just what happened when couples settled into long-term relationships. During our 4th anniversary dinner, we briefly discussed having children. Sabrina had always said she wanted kids eventually, but when I brought it up that night, she deflected quickly. She said she was working towards getting promoted at the moment, mentioning how we needed to be more financially stable before trying to have kids. From all her responses, I understood that her career came first. I understood her position, or at least I tried to. Banking was competitive, and Sabrina had worked hard to establish herself in what was still very much a male-dominated field. I told her I supported whatever timeline felt right to her, and I meant it. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed. At 30, I was ready to start thinking about the next phase of our lives. The real changes began sometime after that anniversary. Sabrina started staying late at work more frequently. When I decided to confront her with this new development, she explained that the promotion she was working for was demanding, and most of her client meetings took more time. The banking industry was demanding, she reminded me, and if she wanted to advance, she needed to put in the extra hours. I noticed other changes, too. Sabrina seems to attend every networking event and industry seminars that always pop up regularly. When she is with me at home, she's always on her phone, which she claimed to be handling work-related, confidential banking business that she couldn't discuss. As the months passed, the distance between us grew wider. Sabrina would come home from these long days, shower immediately, then spend time on her phone or laptop, claiming she had follow-up emails to send or presentations to review. Our weekend routine changed, too. Previously, she had guarded her weekends fiercely, insisting that work stayed at the office. My attempts at physical intimacy gradually got rejected more frequently at this point. Sabrina always had a reason. When we did have sex, it felt different somehow, like her mind was elsewhere. I started to feel like we were 2 people sharing expenses and living space rather than building a life together. The arguments started around this time. I finally worked up the courage to tell Sabrina that I felt neglected, that our marriage seemed to be falling apart while she focused entirely on her career. I asked if there was something else going on, something outside of work that was taking her attention away from us. Sabrina's response was sharp and dismissive. She called me insecure and unsupportive, accused me of trying to sabotage her career advancement just as she was gaining momentum. Feeling hurt and confused by her reaction, I decided to seek advice from my close friends who had been married for 12 years. I respected their relationship and thought they might have insight into what Sabrina and I were going through. They assured me that Sabrina was probably just stressed about her career prospects, that banking was an incredibly competitive field. My friend's wife shared her own experience of being distant and preoccupied during her CPA exam preparation, reminding me that ambitious women often have to work twice as hard to prove themselves professionally. Their reassurance helped, or at least I let it help. I convinced myself that Sabrina needed my patience and understanding rather than my suspicion and neediness. I tried to be more accommodating, more encouraging of her career focus. I would try to adjust and show my support for her professional dedication. But even these gestures felt off somehow. The 2 times I surprised Sabrina at the office, she seemed uncomfortable rather than pleased. She rushed through our meeting and ushered me out quickly, explaining that she had pending work to finish and couldn't afford to spend much time with me. Both times, I noticed her branch manager hovering nearby. He was friendly enough, and I never thought much about it back then. I believed Sabrina was ambitious and professional. Of course, she had good relationships with her supervisors and colleagues. By our 5th anniversary, I had mostly convinced myself that we were going through a rough patch that would eventually resolve itself once my wife achieved her professional goals, and she would create more time and energy to focus on our marriage again. We had reservations at the same Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated most of our anniversaries. The dinner started normally enough, though Sabrina seemed distracted throughout the meal. It was like she had something to say but couldn't figure out how to say it. I asked her several times if she was okay, and the response was the same. She was fine. I felt like she would open up if she wanted to. After we ordered dessert, Sabrina took a deep breath and told me she had news. She was pregnant, about 8 weeks along. My initial reaction was pure joy. This felt like the breakthrough we needed, the thing that would bring us back together and give us a shared focus beyond our individual careers. I reached across the table and grabbed her hands, already talking about converting the spare bedroom into a nursery, about names we might choose, about telling our families. But as I watched Sabrina's face, I realized her expression didn't match the moment. She looked more anxious than happy, more concerned than excited. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, I started doing the math in my head. 8 weeks pregnant meant conception had occurred roughly 10 weeks ago. I tried to remember when Sabrina and I had last been intimate, really intimate, not just the quick, mechanical encounters that most the same time I don't even climax. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. Our last meaningful sexual encounter had been at least a month before the 8 weeks she mentioned. The timeline didn't add up, but I didn't want to voice my suspicions immediately. Maybe I was miscalculating. The next morning, when I suggested we call our parents to share the good news, Sabrina asked me to wait. She wanted to keep the pregnancy private until she was further along, until she was safely into the 2nd trimester. This request felt strange to me. Sabrina had always been close to her family, quick to share both good news and problems. Her desire to keep such significant news secret seemed out of character. But pregnancy could affect women in different ways, I reasoned. Still, I respected her opinion. She probably wanted to be certain everything was progressing normally before making announcements. Over the following weeks, I found myself becoming increasingly suspicious despite my attempts to stay rational. I downloaded a pregnancy tracking app and calculated conception windows, cross-referencing them with my memories of our intimate moments. No matter how I approached the math, the timeline remained problematic. The most likely conception date corresponded with a period when Sabrina had been working late almost every night, when we had barely seen each other, let alone been physically intimate. What made the situation even more confusing was the dramatic change in Sabrina's behavior once she announced the pregnancy and noticed my acceptance of it. Suddenly, she was affectionate again. This shift felt jarring after the distance and coldness of the previous months. If anything, her sudden attentiveness made me more suspicious, not less. I began paying closer attention to details I had previously overlooked. When I suggested accompanying her to prenatal appointments, she seemed uncomfortable with my involvement. When the doctor mentioned taking a family medical history from the father, Sabrina quickly changed the subject. As Sabrina entered her second trimester, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to wait until she was close to delivery before confronting her about my suspicions. My reasoning was strategic. I was sure I wasn't wrong because every indication showed my suspicions were valid. If I had confronted her early, it would only have given her months to create alternative explanations and give me trouble before the baby's bath. Now that I waited until the baby was almost due, if she denies, a DNA test would provide definitive answers within days of birth. The months of waiting were excruciating. I had to act like an excited, expectant father while harboring serious doubts about my wife's fidelity and the paternity of her child. I helped prepare the nursery, attended baby showers, smiled through conversations about our expanding family, all while feeling like I was living in an elaborate deception. I also prepared for the possibility that my worst fears were justified. I researched family law attorneys, learned about paternity rights and obligations, and discovered how quickly legal windows could close after a child's birth. I downloaded a voice recording app on my phone, thinking I might need documentation of any confession Sabrina might make. By Sabrina's 37th week, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The baby would arrive within days or weeks, and once that happened, legal and emotional complications would multiply exponentially. I chose a Tuesday evening that seemed completely ordinary. We had eaten dinner together, gone through our normal routines, and were preparing for bed. As Sabrina sat on her side of the bed, applying cocoa butter to her stretched belly, I activated the recording app on my phone and set it face down on my nightstand. Then I asked the question I had been rehearsing for months. Whose baby was she carrying? Sabrina's initial response was to claim she hadn't heard me correctly, to ask me to repeat the question. When I clarified that I didn't think the baby was mine, and that we could confirm this with a DNA test after birth, she went very quiet for a long time. Then, she asked if I was accusing her of having something outside. I responded by telling her that the timeline didn't match with when we had any form of intercourse. She started crying like someone who had been caught in a lie they were tired of maintaining. Finally, after trying to deflate my concerns, Sabrina admitted that the child wasn't mine. The pregnancy was for her branch manager. But instead of apologizing or showing remorse, Sabrina immediately began trying to convince me that we could make the situation work. She reminded me that I had always wanted children, that we were fairly stable and financially secure, and that her boss was already married with kids. Sabrina genuinely seemed to believe that I should be willing to raise another man's child simply because it would solve her problems. She spoke about my potential love for the baby as if it would erase the months of deception, as if genetics and paternity were mere technicalities that shouldn't matter to a loving husband. She presented her proposal not as a desperate plea for forgiveness, but as a practical arrangement that would benefit everyone involved, everyone except me, apparently. I told Sabrina I needed time to think about her suggestion, though I had already made my decision in my mind. That night, she fell asleep within an hour, seeming relieved to have finally shared her secret. I lay awake listening to her breathe, marveling at her assumption that I would be willing to pretend her child was mine. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove directly to the office of a family law attorney I had been in contact with recently. When I played the recording of Sabrina's confession, he listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes. His advice was immediate and unambiguous. File for divorce before the baby was born, establish non-paternity quickly, and avoid any actions that could create legal or financial obligations to a child that wasn't mine. I signed a retainer agreement that afternoon and authorized the attorney to begin preparing divorce papers. The recording would serve as evidence of adultery and attempted paternity fraud, which would protect me from alimony claims and strengthen my position in asset division negotiations. When I returned home, Sabrina was already on maternity leave as she was expecting to give birth any day. She looked up hopefully when she saw me, asking if I was feeling better. I told her I was much better. The divorce papers were served 4 days later. She confronted me immediately, furious and accusatory, demanding to know how I could do such a thing while she was so close to giving birth. She tried multiple approaches: anger, guilt, manipulation, threats, but I referred all communication through my attorney. Sabrina attempted to involve our families in resolving the situation, but my parents supported my decision once I explained the circumstances. Her parents tried to arrange a meeting, hoping to convince me to reconsider, but I maintained firm boundaries. The workplace fallout was swift and severe. News of the affair spread quickly through the small branch office, and her boss faced an HR investigation that resulted in his transfer to a different location. Sabrina was already on maternity leave as the gossip and scandal made her position untenable. Her career prospects, particularly the promotion she had worked so hard to achieve, were effectively tainted by this situation. The boss's reaction was exactly what Sabrina had predicted. He distanced himself from the situation immediately, worried about his own marriage and professional reputation. The baby was born during the divorce proceedings, and when Sabrina attempted to claim in legal documents that I was the father, the court ordered a paternity test. The DNA results showed zero probability that I was the biological father, officially confirming what I had known for months. The divorce process took 11 months to complete, delayed by Sabrina's legal maneuvers and attempts to secure financial support. However, the recording of her confession, combined with the paternity test results, made her position indefensible. The house was sold, and the proceeds were divided according to our agreement. I retained my retirement accounts and investment portfolios, and the adultery evidence eliminated any possibility of alimony obligations. Throughout the process, I never met or saw the child. I maintained strict legal boundaries, understanding that any emotional involvement could create complications or obligations that would follow me for decades. Her boss's paternity was eventually established through separate legal proceedings she took against him, though I wasn't involved in those arrangements. The final decree was granted on a cold Thursday morning in February. After nearly a year of legal proceedings, I was completely free of any ongoing obligations to Sabrina or her child. Her attempts at reconciliation throughout the process were firmly rejected. The trust that had been broken could never be repaired. The months immediately following the divorce were difficult. I struggled with feelings of betrayal, anger, and loneliness that I hadn't fully anticipated. There were sleepless nights when I replayed our entire marriage, wondering what signs I had missed, questioning whether I had been naive or willfully blind to what was happening. Therapy helped me process the experience and begin rebuilding my sense of self-worth. Gradually, I began to understand that my decision to divorce Sabrina wasn't just about the affair or the pregnancy. It was about the fundamental disrespect she had shown by expecting me to live a lie for her convenience. The realization that felt most liberating was this: Sabrina hadn't loved me as a person, but rather as a provider of security and stability. When her affair created complications that threatened her comfortable life, she expected me to absorb the consequences without regard for my own feelings or dignity. Her proposal that I raise her boss's child wasn't born of love, but of a calculated assessment that I was useful enough to keep around. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I can honestly say that my life is better than it was during those final years of marriage. I moved to a new apartment, renewed my focus on fitness and friendships, and found professional success that led to a significant promotion. While I might date again, I am more cautious about red flags and boundary violations than I was in my 20s. The experience taught me that self-respect is more valuable than preserving a relationship built on deception. Sabrina's expectation that I would raise another man's child simply to maintain her version of family stability showed a level of disrespect that no amount of couples counseling could have addressed. Filing for divorce wasn't an act of revenge or spite. It was an act of self-preservation. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to refuse to participate in someone else's deception, even when that person is someone you once loved deeply. Looking back now, I realized that the worst part of the entire experience wasn't discovering Sabrina's affair or learning that her child wasn't mine. The worst part was the moment I understood that she thought so little of me that she believed I would accept such treatment indefinitely. That's when I knew our marriage had been overlong before I filed the papers that made it official.